And welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, episode 133. It's a little bit full of the cold today, so apologies if I start coughing, snuffling, or generally starting to sound a bit croaky. Today we're going to be talking about a photo shoot I did for Performance Collective Stranraer, and essentially it was a bit of improvised street theatre and the problems you have when you can't control the lighting or the positioning of people or what they're up to. So I'm going to show you some of the photos and talk about some of the problems we came up against, and then we'll be doing critique. So I've had 3 people send in some images, and I've got some I think you're really going to quite enjoy what I've got there. And then finally I'm going to tell you what we're up to next week and then into the new year. So do make sure you stick around, and I'll see you in a moment. So yes, hello, here we are, live on YouTube, unless you happen to be watching the recordings, in which case make sure you've subscribed and hit the little notifications bar as well. So yes, if you are watching live, do leave a comment, say hello, say where you're from, tell me what you're up to. So I can see we've got a couple of comments in already. Pat's here saying bitter here in Somerset, just snow on the hills. Maggie says so cold. Rosemary says good morning, it's chilly here in Pacific Northwest America too. And Andy says greeting folks. Alright, so we've got people in already, that's great. And Marilyn says hello from Colorado. Hi Marilyn, glad you could make it. Meg says, good afternoon everyone, and it's very cold down in Castle Douglas. And it is. On Friday evening I drove out to a friend's house and it was -7 according to the car's thermometer on the way, which for some people around the world isn't very cold at all, and for others is Baltic, as they say around here. Very cold here. We've got the heating on, and you might have seen I'm actually, despite the fact we've had the heating on solid and on overnight for the last couple of nights, I'm still sitting here in a cardigan as well, needing to say a bit. The cold and snuffles that I've got as well isn't really helping much with that, so I'm determined to try and stay a little bit warmer. Right, okay, so what are we going to talk about? I'm going to talk about Performance Collective Stranraer. So, a performance company, collective of different people, they put on different kinds of performances and productions throughout the year. And one of them was called Bippity, and it had 5 performers, and they were asked to perform back in the summer in Kirkcudbright, which is a town just about 9 miles down the road from here, during the festivities there. And I was asked if I could do some photography for it. So what I'm going to do then, I'll show you some of the photos, and then as I go I'll kind of talk through some of the problems. But if anything occurs to you, make sure you leave a comment as well. So what have we got then? So actually, first off, what I'll just do is I'll just show you a kind of, because one of the things is what I did get the chance to do was a little bit of behind. I was kind of embedded in with them as well. So I shot off a whole load of behind the scenes photos. I won't really go into them. They're less of kind of what I'm on about, but just to give you a sort of sense of what was going on. Here we can see, I'm going to just make a couple of little quick adjustments to my view bar here so I can actually see what's going on. No, remove that, there we go, and then I can move that over there, stretch that out, and now I can actually see what's actually going on. That's pretty good. Here we go, 133 episodes in, and I still haven't got everything sorted out. So yeah, this, as you can see, me just quick camera shot. So there's a wee room set aside where makeup was being put on, Now there were 3 performances, each of them were about half an hour long, and the idea was that they were playing these characters. They had a very loose structure, but essentially they were improvising. There were no words spoken as such. There were noises made, or made up words, sometimes repeated, and they played these 5 characters and they moved around the space. Now they did 3 performances across the course of between 11 o'clock in the morning and 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and so I was kind of a bit embedded with them at the time. And the handy thing about being for 3 performances was, first of all, it allowed me to kind of start to get a sense of it. So the first set of photos weren't necessarily, I got a couple of interesting ones. The second set of photos I was getting a bit better. The third set of photos I was really kind of into my stride, and most of the photos that ended up getting used came in the third session. But what I'll do then is let me show you some of the photos. So they started off, they kind of came out from through this archway. They came out one at a time. One of them would sort of take up a pose, and then the next one would come out up and in a slightly different. And they all kind of had characters, whether it was gregarious or fearful or overconfident or comical. Or even slightly aggressive in some cases, but they would sort of embody these characters for a little while, and then they kind of, so once they came all out, and then they were, and it was really interesting to see. It was really fun to watch as they fed off each other in the way good improvisation does. So we've got these characters; they're all kind of made up. They're all kind of moving about. And then they would start sort of interacting with their surrounds and their environment. So I'm taking up different poses here. So, a little way down, there were some benches. So they start playing around with that. Or here where start sliding down the banisters, the railings, on steps that go down. In Kukubri, there's an old cannon sits there as part of things, start climbing on top of that and playing around. So at this point, there's part of it is I'm taking photos of them doing this, but then it's not just them. At this point, the only photos you can see are ones that are where I've just got the camera on them, so you can only see them in the photos. The reality is, though, that there were other people moving around, and if I move around here, you can suddenly see there's a crowd of mostly parents and kids, it has to be said, who were having it well. Various reactions, and it's quite fun. It's quite fun sometimes watching what the people in the audience are doing. You've got some kids, like in this case, these ones here seem to be clinging on to Dad. I'm not entirely sure what's going on, feeling slightly threatened. Whereas this kid here is just absolutely, big broad grin on his face, obviously much more excited. Whereas Dad here, obviously having a bit of fun with it. Mum here having fun, she's less certain. Boys are kind of wondering what's going on. And so sometimes if you're in this kind of situation where you're taking photos, it's quite often fun to try and make sure you get some of the crowd response in there, because it isn't just the performance. The performance ends up feeding very much with the crowd, and part of their remit was to sort of improvise as much as they could with the surrounding benches, trees, objects, whatever happened to be there, but also to engage the people. So you can see here, for example, so, they've moved out. And the thing is, they kept moving around. So the crowd, the audience had to move around with them. So they're down on the slope. And at this point, what you're also doing is you're trying to, where you can, think about the, excuse me, a really tickly throat here. You are trying to think about lines. So managing to get this sort of line of the wall here and the crowd here while this guy's coming up this side of it as well, and kind of creating that compositional. Where you can, you're looking for compositional lines, framing, diagonals, action, movement, leading lines, this kind of stuff. So all the skills that you're learning in composition as a photographer are really absolutely put to the test when you're photographing a live performance over which you have no control whatsoever. At this point, there's a family there having, sitting there trying to eat their lunch, and they go up and start interacting with them, which is quite a bit of fun. And again, you can see the reaction. The little girl's absolute delight here. The wee boy's sort of semi-terror as he's got absolutely no idea what's going to go on here. And we can see the hand rolls here. Are they going to be swiped or snaffled at any moment? With this one, I think there was somebody, and I think she plucked their mobile phone off them, and they all sort of did a selfie. Again, absolutely unscripted, only happened the once over the three things. And it was really interesting to see how they would sort of just interact, and they're absolutely fired up and keyed into these improvisational characters. Also, there happened to be down on the green, there was this frame, and it's put there specifically for just people to sort of play around with and take photos of themselves with it. So they started playing with this frame, and then they started moving it about and lifting it up, and you can see here lots of little kids coming in, and then they're kind of interacting with them like a painting that's come to life. Or in this case, what they did was there were some other people sitting on a bench over there, so they took the frame over to them and started improvising with them. You can see the guy at the back here sort of chuckling as he kind of getting swept along with it, also slightly uncertain as to what's going to happen next. So again, when you're taking these kind of photos, you're looking for the opportunity to create frames within frames. And then what's always a bit of fun is trying to get, if you see somebody with their own phone or camera, taking a photo of them. So in this case, I've got a photo of the camera of the frame. So you've kind of almost got like, that's your final image, but caught within this one, which is caught within the photo. So that's always a little bit of fun. That you can definitely have fun with that kind of thing, just photographing what other people are photographing, like literally over their shoulder. We did spend sort of 10 minutes at the end to try and get some photos that we thought that maybe they could use for a bit of publicity afterwards. And for that, what I did was I put the wide angle lens on in order to try and get that distorted feeling. So with this case, we got the 5 of them, and we got them to just start striding towards the camera, and they sort of put on all these characters and exaggerated these movements, and I shot off half a dozen photos, and this one had the best lines and sense of movement and energy and character in them, and I think this one got used quite a few times. And then but again, we've talked before about that notion of using the wide angle lens. Well, the wide angle lens sort of distorts things and just makes everything feel slightly that bit off kilter. And here's one. I did 5 different versions of this phone. I'll not show you all 5, but basically they took it in turns to be the one on the front and then the 4 others kind of peering in. So with each of them, the one at the front was looking straight into the camera, the other 4 were then all looking at the person in the middle. And I think, again, they all had different energy to them. This in the end was the one with my favourite one, and the one which I think got used the most as well. There was a point though, I must admit, when we were sort of back here in that there was just sitting down here, just sort of tucked off to the bottom right, I noticed one of them sort of sitting playing with makeup, and there was a notion there was 2 windows. You can't quite see here the other side of this mirror, just that wall a bit, and then there was a window, then there was a seat, and then there was this window. And so actually there was a side light and there was a sort of backlight naturally coming through the windows. So I grabbed hold of Andre and said, "Oh look, just give me a look straight into the camera." And he did, and so I got this rather nice portrait, which I was quite pleased with. So I think this was between the 2nd and 3rd showing. So bits of the makeup have started to come off, taking in turns to get it all patched up again. And once I got Andre here, I thought, okay, I've got to get the others as well. So we got Annalise, and I particularly like this one. And then this one was Stephen. We got Kimberly, and then finally finishing with Ryan. So making. I was fortunate in the fact that I had time to be able to get these headshots as well. These weren't part of what I was asked to do. It's just me. I love portraits. Suddenly give me a chance to sort of do a headshot, and I will. So that's really kind of what I wanted to show you, was that notion of an opportunity to do some street photography, kind of a performance photography, which is kind of like street photography, except the fact that nobody really minds that you have the camera with you. It is much trickier, and your hit rate for photos is much lower. You don't have the control. You've got no idea where the people are going to go next. You've got no idea you can't control the lighting, you can't control the background. But what you can do is you can still use your understanding of photography to move around, to start thinking, well, okay, I've taken this photo, that's quite interesting, but what's going on in the background? And I think that's one of the key things to understand when you're doing this kind of photography, is to try and bring half an eye onto the idea of what's going on behind. Is, if I actually move 2 paces to the right or to the left, will I get something a little bit more interesting? How much can I kind of balance up and play with the composition of something that's sort of permanently moving around? Sometimes they sort of hold one position for a little bit while they're moving about, and that gives you a chance to sort of try different angles. But at this point, fortunately, we are in the age of digital. So you fire off hundreds and hundreds of photos, and hopefully some of them will work out, and then you can tidy them up in the editing. So that's really what I want to chat about with that. Oh, got a couple more people in. Excuse me, with comments. Viji says, good evening, everyone. So Viji's made it from India. Roy says, hello from West Yorkshire. Viji says, had a cyclone and weather is quite cold. 22 degrees centigrade is the coldest we get. Well, 22 is absolutely a Scottish summer here. So yes, I was saying, Viji, where it was -7 the other night. It was -4, I think, last night. It's currently just 1 or 2 degrees above freezing at the moment, but it's looking like it's going to go down to about -3 again tonight. Meg says, I really like the different colours of the costumes of the photo shoot. Rosemary says, that sounds like such a challenging shoot. I can see where such a thing would help hone your predictive skills. Oh, Nick Bath is here and says, hello all. Yeah, you're right, Rosemary. I think it is honing. It's one of those things whereby, don't be put off by it. In fact, use these kind of things as an opportunity. As we've said many times before, the more you photograph, the better you get. There's quite simply a practice. Every photo you get wrong is a step forward. So you keep practice, and the main thing is about not getting disillusioned. If you take 800 photos and you get back and you've only got 3 or 4 that turned out halfway decent, the problem is you end up thinking, oh right, well great, 790 whatever of them didn't really work, and some of them will be pretty awful. A lot of them will be out of focus or bits chopped off or what have you. But the fact that you got some that worked, that's what helps you kind of work out, well, okay, these are the ones that I need to latch on to. Where can I learn? What did I go wrong? Where did I go wrong? Well, some of them you're going to know, but you didn't focus on the right bit, or something moved, or you just had everything lined up perfectly, and as you went click, somebody else moved in front of you. These kind of things always happen. But the more you do these things, the more you start to develop an instinct for it. If not an instinct, as Rosemary says, kind of a predictive quality to it. Sometimes going and photographing live performances of any kind. I've talked before about live bands. If you get into the rhythm of the music and you watch the way the band moves, quite often, after a while, you'll start to get a sense that if at the end of the first chorus, the singer is in that position, the chances are at the end of the second chorus, they're going to be in the same position. So if you didn't get the photo at the end of the first chorus, wait for it, tune into the music, and you'll get it at the end of the second. And so it's the same kind of thing. If you're watching performers, for however chaotic they are, you they tune into each other. The great thing about watching these people improvise is there's a way that they feed off each other. And the more you do it, the more you can tune into them, the more you can kind of almost start to feed off them and get a sense of their unpredictability, but also the opportunity of where sometimes you can start to feel the energy that something's about to happen. So absolutely worth playing around with. So I hope you found that interesting. And for those of you who turned up late, when you get to the end, you can rewind and take a look. Great thing about YouTube is these are all recorded. So all previous 132 episodes can be found here on my YouTube channel. So You have to forgive me sniffling and just, it's quite a horrible cold, this. It is just a cold, it's nothing worse, but it's just quite a nasty one. Yeah, but if you happen to be finding these podcasts useful, interesting, entertaining, then do consider supporting me with buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres, and maybe I'll put a dollop of honey in it as well. Honey and lemon. Not quite for coffee though, is it? Right, okay, so what we're going to do then is we're going to move on to the critique section. And we've had 3 people send in images for critique. Rosemary, Viji and Robert have all sent in some rather interesting images. So now the critique section is really, this is the bit. I mean, I can talk about photo shoots or like I did before, but in the end I've come to realise that the critique, this is the bit which is my speciality. This is the bit where you can really learn. This is the bit where you can learn which you can't really get elsewhere. You can go onto YouTube and you can find out. I mean, yeah, fine, I will talk about compositional techniques, lighting techniques, all this kind of stuff. There are other people who talk about this stuff. I can talk about photo shoots. There are other people who talk about their photo shoots. But there's very, very few people at all who will give you genuine feedback on your photos. And after 2.5 years of this, I've become to realise that this really is my speciality. And it's also the bit where you as a photographer, if you want to really learn, really advance your photography, this is what you need. You need the feedback. We can only get so far on our own with our photos because we have blind spots. We can't help but have blind spots in our own photos. We take a photo of something and sometimes we're caught up in the thing itself so much that we don't notice what's going on in the background, which might be distracting from the main story of the photo. Or sometimes we know something's there, but we can't, but it's not quite right, and we don't really know why it isn't right. We know we're onto something, and at this point, being able to get feedback from somebody who knows what they're talking about is absolutely invaluable. This in turn is making me think strongly about how I'm going to adjust and develop these podcasts when we get into the new year. Coming next week is the final one of the year. Next week we're going to have Festive Fun. I'll talk about this again at the end, but basically what I want you to do is send in your Festive Fun photos, and that's whether it's for Christmas, whether it's for Hanukkah, whether it's for midwinter festival, midwinter solstice or midsummer solstice if you happen to be in the southern hemisphere. Then, whatever it is, just this time of year, there's all sorts of festivals going on. Let's create fun photos. And then when we come back in the new year, we will have a best of 2022 as well. Because the problem is, whilst next Sunday is the 18th, the Sunday after is the 25th. That's Christmas Day. Won't be doing a podcast on them. The following Sunday will be New Year's Day, and I won't be doing a podcast then. So after next week, the following podcast will be 3 weeks later on the 8th of January. So like I say, that will be a best of 2022, and I want you to send in your images, your favourite, your best photo, and we'll just enjoy that. And then after that, I'm going to sort of do a slight change, and I think what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to do more emphasis on the critique. Really, it's the bit I really enjoy doing. I think it's the bit that you most benefit from if you're really wanting to develop your photography. And certainly, whenever I've kind of put out the feelers before, tends to be the bit everybody enjoys most. So I will talk about this more next week, and obviously when we come back in the new year as well. But I hope you'll kind of have a bit more fun and join in with the critique sections. So let's get on to this week's critique then. So what we're going to do is I'm going to start off with, and again I should have adjusted all these windows and bits and pieces here first before I did this. But we're going to start with Viji, I think. And so Viji sent in this photo, and she said, where are we? Yes, here we go. This photo was taken through a Canon bridge camera. I love the posture of the bird and immediately clicked. Let me know what you feel about this photograph. She also wanted to know, how can this photo be edited to bring out the translucency in the wings? So the translucence, that's that notion of the idea that the light is kind of coming through the wings. What we notice is that although the wing is out, we can see brighter patches underneath it. It's not completely in shadow. So the light is partially coming through the wings, and Viji's wanting to know how to enhance that. Now, interestingly, this notion, or what I would say first of all, is the notion that Viji is using a bridge camera. And so a bridge camera is, well, you have your point and shoot cameras, you know, kind of, and then you have your DSLRs where you can swap your lenses about. A bridge camera tends to be a sort of somewhere in between. It tends to have one lens which is already fixed. It operates more like a DSLR. You can have different manual modes and what have you, but it tends to have the one lens which goes from wide angle to super zoom. Now you have to be slightly careful with the super zoom, because some of them you have an optical zoom level, and then they add more onto that by using a digital zoom. Now the digital zoom basically isn't really worth it. If you edit your photos on a computer, all the digital zoom does is essentially crop your photo in tight. So if you actually zoom in on the image on the computer, it's not that you've got more detail, it actually just becomes more and more pixelated. And what's interesting with this is this one was obviously taken at the absolute limit of Viji's camera. And despite the fact that this photo is 5,000 pixels wide, so it's a really good size image, even at this size, I can start to see some of the noise. And as I zoom in, you look here, it's a very, very, very noisy photo. It's almost like this photo is maybe only a quarter to an eighth of the size in terms of resolution. It's just been blown up bigger. So something to be aware of with the digital zoom. What I would say is, generally speaking, if you've got a bridge camera and it's got an optical zoom, so which is the bit where you can turn manually to zoom in, and then it's got an extra bit which is the digital zoom, I would say don't use the digital zoom. Go as far as you can, zoom in as far as you can with the optical zoom, and then on the computer afterwards, you quite often find that there's a lot of programs which will allow you to enlarge a photo, crop in and enlarge a bit and keep a bit more of the detail than the stuff that's built into the camera's one. So it allows you to have more control over it. So let's talk about this photo first of all. First of all, though, apart from that, what I would say is, what a fantastic capture, Viji. Brilliant. I really like this one. I mean, the idea of the heron on the post. I think it's a heron. Maybe it's not. No, it's not a heron. Not entirely sure what bird it is. Leave a comment for me if you happen to know what bird it is. But the idea of it standing on the post is great, and then getting its head tucked over under, preening its wings, fantastic, and this brilliant diagonal line coming out, and then we've got this sort of space before. For the way you've organised it, I would preferably like to just nudge the bird over to the right a little bit, just have a little bit more space on the left. There's a lot of space over here, not quite so much space. It all feels a bit bunched up on this side. So let's just open it up with Photoshop for a moment, and I'll show you what I mean about the right. So we've got, here's our picture, and basically I think if we were to take this and just move it over a little bit to the right, let's just in fact we'll do content aware here just to make sure this bit gets filled in the left. So if I just enter that, and there we go. So it's just the difference between that, and I think this feels slightly more balanced. In that term of rule of thirds helps give you that. And we also kind of get this post then coming up towards the diagonal corner there, which I think works quite well. Now, the next bit that we're worrying about is that notion of getting the translucency and really making a point of it. And there's a couple of different ways you can do about it. And really what we're talking about here is, in order to bring it out, is the notion of contrast. We're wanting to make sure that the brights are brighter, or brighter by comparison to the darks. So we've got options. I mean, if I kind of take the lights and lighten up this bit, what will happen is we could possibly lose too much detail in here if we're not careful. So there's a couple of different, I mean, okay, let's, for example, let me show you the brightness contrast here. If I just grab the contrast, and actually the contrast is quite nice. You see, the contrast makes the background a little bit darker, and it starts to make the bird itself stand out a little bit more. If we make the whole thing too bright, you see we start to lose detail in the wing. Make it too dark, we lose some of the detail there. So actually, just as a very basic thing, let's just go back to 0 with that. Just playing around with the contrast, I think, can make a bit of difference, something like that. And then it's kind of deciding how far you go with that. Another option you could do, having done the contrast, means we've sort of made this bit a bit darker in the shadows. If I Control J there, and maybe if I do dodge and burn, and just using the dodge tool, I've got this mid-tone set to about 5%, just lightly start to bring up a little bit more light in the shadow here, maybe a little bit more tucked under the wings, something like that. So I'm kind of trying to lighten up some of the bits, so we've got a little bit of the body, but not too much. We kind of, maybe I've slightly overdone it, but what I can also do is use the burn tool and then very carefully just kind of, and this becomes, it's the same as using the contrast in a way that we've just done, except I'm more selectively using it, something like that. So essentially we move from that to that, and it gives us that little bit more contrast from where we were. So kind of, I would sort of kind of suggest that really, Viji. I think, now, other ways you can do it, if we go back to here, let's duplicate that layer. If we go into Filter, Camera, Raw, we can, maybe again, if we give it a little bit of a vignette or something like that, just darken in the edges a little bit more, helps bring a touch to that. Again, that's the contrast. You can play with the contrast, and maybe you can play with the contrast like that, but actually add in a little bit of clarity as well, just kind of... Now, we've got to be careful here because we are losing a lot of the texture. Perhaps we want to go to the detail, bring a little bit of noise reduction into that. But it's a tricky one because it is a very noisy one, and if we go too far, it's just going to kind of end up looking a bit too soft. But you can see there, then, again, it really stands out. And I think having the extra clarity rather than just the contrast kind of works quite nicely. So something like that, Viji, I think is really the way you want to go. What you're trying to do is create that bit more contrast between the bird and the background, and something as simple as playing with the brightness contrast can do that. Or if you want to go into Camera Raw and play around with clarity sliders as well, that's another way you can go. So I hope that gives you a couple of ideas there, Viji. Right, a couple of comments here. Rosemary says you did a good job of getting some translucency, Viji, and I like the angles you were able to catch. Pat says perfect background colour to Viji's photo. And Viji says I will keep in mind regarding optical and digital zoom. Excellent. Okay, right, where am I? You'll have to forgive me just for one moment. I can just feel a little bit starting to run down the end of my nose, and that's not quite so pleasant to be watching live on video. Okay, so what we're going to... oh, Meg says really nice photo. So, great start there. So, next up then, we're going to talk about Rosemary's photo. Now, I was really excited by Rosemary's. I think there's a really nice idea here. So, what Rosemary says is, the photo I need help with is part of a challenge to take 30 unique images of a single object. And that's a brilliant challenge. I love that one. You take any object. Can you take 30 photos of it? And 30 different photos of it? Because any object, you're going to start off, yeah, I can do that. You can do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. What on earth am I going to do that's different now? You try, you tried from the left and to the right. You tried from above. You tried from going below. And now you start to run out of ideas. Oh, maybe I can change the background. I'll try to shoot it in the kitchen, and I'll shoot it in the living room, and I'll shoot it in the garden. And, okay, maybe I've got up to 10. 30? That's really going to be stretching you. So in terms of pushing your imagination, to have a number which is actually that little bit feels out of reach really is, it doesn't mean that every single one of those 30 photos has to be perfect, but it's just the very idea of attempting it. It doesn't matter whether 20 of them are just really didn't work very well, but the fact that you attempted it I think is really, really good. So it's a lovely idea, that one. So Rosemary goes on. So my chosen object is a violin. After getting the past immediately obvious dozen or so angles, I started thinking about ways to convey music in a photograph. Since my favourite Baroque era violin pieces are bright and airy and light evoking, I wanted to try and have light emit from the sound holes. And what I did was to stuff a string of fairy lights through the sound holes. So let's show you the photo that Rosemary did. So this is Rosemary's photo. So you can see what we've got here is we've got the violin, and we've got light coming out of the sound holes. And by doing that, in order to get that effect, she's put fairy lights in it. She goes on to say, removing them was terrifying because of the way the wire tried to tug at a delicate and very important post on the inside. Well, okay, that sounds a bit scary. So the thought of putting the violin at risk to reshoot the scene made me very nervous. Not surprised at all. Perhaps you or a group member have suggestions for a more forgiving type of light to slip through the holes, through the narrow opening of the sound holes. Otherwise, fixes may have to be done limited to post-processing magic. Okay, well, there's a thought. Anybody got any other ideas for... So Rosemary slipped fairy lights into it, but some of them started to get tangled around a bit, one of the posts on the inside, which, if she's not careful, could end up damaging the violin. Anybody got any other suggestions? Maybe it's the number of lights you put in. Maybe you only need to sort of slide a few in. Make sure you tape off the ones that are closest to where they're... If you're sliding them into it, maybe, you know, if you're sliding a handful, you know, you've got them plugged in and they're going in. Presumably you've got the wire... if you've not put the whole lot in, if you've got the wire kind of going in behind here so that we can't see it, you put a couple of little bits of black tape over the lights that might show up, then that way you can get away with only putting a few more in and hopefully less chance of it getting caught on the way out. Other lighting, nothing immediately springs to mind, but if anybody does have any ideas, leave a note in the comments for that. So she goes on for questions. Does the concept work? Does the dark overall exposure work around the mood of the bright and airy sound? The light coming from the hole is so bright it was really challenging to come up with good exposure. Do I have any suggestions? The dark room made for a very challenging focus. What suggestions do you have for focusing in darkness? Okay, so first of all, concept. Yeah, I think the concept's a fun one. I like that idea of the light coming out of the violin. Now, part of what you're just one of the suggestions here, what you're trying to do is you're trying to create the light, but you're wanting the light to stand out against the dark. And so you've made the room dark, which has made it difficult to focus. Now, what I would say with that is darken down the room, not too much though, to the point whereby you can still focus relatively easily. But then what you do is underexpose so that so that only the light tends to show up. So the surrounding light, the ambient light, doesn't show up as much. And it's a trick I use quite often. So sometimes I'm photographing in ambient light, and the light itself is you know, it's kind of a dull daylight, but I want the light to come off the flashes that I'm using. So I underexpose, and then what happens is when the flashes go off, the flashes are the only thing that are actually lighting things up. Now, a tricky one here, because the fairy lights aren't necessarily going to be as powerful, well, obviously not going to be as powerful as a flash. So there is a certain amount of playing around with balance with what you're trying to do is underexpose slightly, while at the same time going for slower shutter speed to allow enough light to kind of emanate. I can see it being a particularly difficult thing to do. maybe fairy light. Well, the problem is partly what you've got here is the fact that your only entry into into the violin is a very narrow sound hole. It's not like a guitar, say, where you can take a small torch and stick the torch in, or you can put a bigger bundle of lights, or even possibly, depending on the size of the sound hole on your guitar, you might even actually manage to fit a small flash on the inside, which could be interesting. So there is that, but you also do run the fact that if your only real light on this is the light that's coming from the inside, then the outside can get a little lost as well. And sometimes what you might want to have is a little bit of light or a reflector or something bouncing a little bit of light onto the outside edges of the violin, so that it's not just totally, so that even not, sometimes you only get the light in the middle and then the outside just becomes completely black when actually you want a little bit more texture. I think, okay, let's Rosemary sent me the original raw file here, so let's take a little look at that. So we can see from here then, from the original file, that Rosemary's brightened it up quite a bit. But one of the problems as well as sort of bringing up the dark out of the shadows is quite noisy, but there's also there's a certain amount of kind of color noise in here as well. It doesn't feel fully balanced. There is one other thing here which I noticed, which is you've got a different background, and I'm guessing when I look here, I see, when I zoom in, I see you've got a textured background, and this presumably is to get around the banding. So this is what I was talking about last week, about the problem when you've got shades and you're that actually adding texture can work quite well. But there is one thing you need to understand about the texture, Rosemary, and that is your texture here is quite sharp compared to the violin itself, where if you look at your depth of field, it's nice and sharp here at the front of the bridge. By the time we get to the back of the bridge, it's gone out of focus. So given the fact that your textured background would, if it was natural, be even further back, that itself then needs to also blur out of focus. Now, blur it too much out of focus, you come back to your banding problem, so you're looking for the right kind of balance. You might have to move sliders a little bit back and forth until you get something that you're happy with. But do understand that it's unnatural to have it sharp in the foreground to get steadily blurrier as it moves back, and then to suddenly be sharp behind it again. That one will trip you up, so be aware of that. So let's come back to this photo, and so where are we? Now, so if I just click auto on that, oh, that makes it kind of a bit too bright, not quite so keen on that auto, so we'll turn that off. I'll nudge the exposure up a little bit, but we've got to be careful here because that's starting to blow out the highlights. I'll bring the highlights down a little bit, maybe bring the shadows up a little bit, and we've got something to start playing with. And what I will also do here, though, not curve, that wasn't what I was looking for, detail, that's what I was trying to get, is because we're going to start playing around this, although I'm just going to take the sharpening down a bit, because on my raw, I don't know about yours, mine always seems to sit way too sharp. Nudge the noise reduction up a little bit, bring the sharpness up a little bit, just like that. So now when I click open, and let's just close Viji's one there so it doesn't get in the way, we end up with something like this. Now the first thing that strikes me is I think you're missing a trick here, Rosemary, which is your composition. We'll not worry too much about the background for the moment. First, certainly that brighter part we can kind of chop out there, except for the fact that you've got it lying flat. And I think if you're wanting to really try and capture the dynamism of music, especially fiddle music or violin music, then really you want to make the most of the diagonals. So I would be very, very tempted to turn this. And as we kind of rotate it, what also becomes interesting is actually we get more to where the story is. The real story here is where you've got the sound hole, the light, and this bridge. The bridge and the neck. And if we just kind of bring that out a little bit, and I've rotated this, so we've got this now on the diagonals. So this line here goes down to this corner, and the neck and the strings on the neck go up to that corner. And then if I enter that, now we've got a little bit up there, I'll just content aware fill on those. Now we've got a little bit of texture up here. If we don't really want that, well, what I could do is create, not that, I'll create an extra layer. I'll just get a bit of black paint, put it on the extra layer so that I can change it and just kind of do a little rough corner there, a little rough corner there. That darkens it down a little bit. What I could do is just create a very softer, slightly softer kind of feel like that. And then I can, having done it on a separate layer, if I don't want it all dark, I can change the opacity of that. But I'll keep it there for the moment. And now I think when we've got this, we've got much more of the story that's going on. Now, what I am aware though is that it's now quite a bit of black. So can we come in a little bit closer? Maybe because I don't think we need as much of that. So if we pull this in, where's the real story? The real story is still happening closer in here. And I think if we can do this, and we're still looking to the idea of having this going up into the top left corner and this into the bottom right. So maybe tilt that a fraction more, bring something like that. And so we've come in a little bit closer and we've still got the story. You know, we've not lost anything. We've managed to kind of enhance it a little bit, I think. So now that we've got this, I'll select all, copy paste, join those two layers together. And then if we go into Camera Raw at this point, I think what we can do is optics, we'll just vignette that a little bit, just, but I think we grab the clarity tool and we drag, there we go. Create that little bit more contrast here. Maybe take those highlights down a fraction, and just so you can play with it. Now that's kind of overcooking it, but I like when you do this, it starts to bring out some of the reflection of the bridge and the strings in here as well, where the light's bouncing off them, which I really quite like. It's a kind of nice warm mood here. So then I click OK on that. Maybe still a little bit too much up here. Well, if I was to bring that in and down a little bit, something like that, that sort of misses the corner. But what I could do is just use the dodge tool and this little edge here. If I just, I'm using the mid-tones to, well, let's just take, for easy's sake, let's take that up to 30 so I can, and I'm just going to lighten up that corner of the board, something like that. And now that creates that extra little line which gives it that feeling of the whole thing running into the corner. So you'll remember when we've talked before about diagonals, for some reason the photos seem to work much better if the diagonals kind of really go into the corner rather than miss the corner. So just by doing that, that just helps that a little bit there. And there, now Rosemary, I think we've got the photo you were really after. And I don't think this sort of little bit of light in the background we need to worry too much about. You could softly darken that down, but it's just a little bit of, it's almost an echo there of this shape here. But what we've really got is we've got a kind of richness of the wood, we've got the light, we've got the glow, we've got the reflection of the underside of the bridge and the strings reflecting back into the wood itself. And it's I think this has got that kind of warm, rich glow that you were after. But I think having it at the diagonal is really giving it the energy, that sense of this is an instrument that can be played, and that sense of music is dynamic, music moves. And we've talked many times before about the fact that strong horizontals and strong verticals stabilize an image. The diagonals add the sense of movement and energy and dynamism to them. And if you're really wanting to try and bring out that sense of music, which is a dynamic moving energy thing, I think you need to look for the diagonals wherever you can. So that tilting, I think, is where it really works. So hope that helps. Hope that gives you a few ideas, Rosemary. But thank you for sending that in. That's a really lovely photo. And I love that idea as well of 30 different photos of a single object. How do you go about it? Because that's really going to stretch the imagination. Right, okay. So, where are we? Oh, Rosemary says, nowhere near all 30 images yet. I can imagine that being a tricky one. Maggie says, lovely reflections of the strings and the bridge. Viji says, the idea is brilliant and the photo is nicely taken. Nick Bath says maybe tape them together. Oh, tape the tape the fairy lights together. Yeah, maybe use a translucent tape. Then yeah, I suppose part of it's also though the thickness to try and get them to play. I suppose yeah. Rosemary says, oh, I like the diagonal tint. Viji says the diagonal tilt crop is good. Meg says, really like the idea of lighting inside the violin. Sandy's joined us and says, the light in the sound hole is maybe too stark. A bit dimmer might help and draw your eye to the bridge and strings better. Rosemary says, you've inspired me to keep working on this and all incredibly helpful. I'll have to re-listen and jot down notes. Absolutely. The great thing about these is you can come back and watch this again and again. And Pat says, excellent result, Kim. Oh, thank you, Pat. Okay, so let's move on then to Robert's image now. So Robert sent in, where are we? He sent in this photo and said, I'm entering a contest called Perspective at the Dallas Camera Club. I wanted to get your take on this photo. It was taken on December 31st last year at a West Texas ghost town called Gilliland. It was a very interesting place to photograph. In the past few years, they've been constructing wind farms all over the area. Black and white editing is not something that I tend to do a lot, so any suggestions you could give would be greatly appreciated. So, Robert's gone out to this ghost town. He did send me another photo, which I've not got time to look at today. But what I really like about this is what Robert's done is he's obviously got one of these great wind turbines behind him, and then you've got the shadow running, acting as a leading line to all this entire massive wind turbines over in the distance. And then there's kind of a slightly textured dramatic sky there as well. So I think the idea is a good one, and I think you're well onto something here, Robert. Now, what Robert did was Robert sent me the original, which always makes it a lot easier for me to work out potential ways of playing with the edit or possibly giving you pointers of directions you could go. So, oh, that's the wrong one. Cancel that. That was the other photo he sent in, which I don't have time for. So this one then is the wind farm. So this is his original photo. So let's just open that straight raw. Now, if we go back to here, so it's turned it to black and white. The first thing I do notice, though, is I can't help but note that again, this horizon doesn't feel absolutely straight to me. So I would want to just... difficult one, and maybe you've tilted, and it still looks slightly tilted to me. But let's play around with the original anyway. So let's, where am I? Back to Photoshop. And the very first thing I'm going to do is just straighten that a fraction. I'm just going to hold down, I think, what's that? 0.3, 0.5, 0.4. No, 0.3. Okay, 0.3 of a degree. I mean, it's really not much. I'll just use the content aware there. So, a couple of interesting things about this is, first of all, you've got to convert it to black and white. Now, what we have here, you've got there's texture in the sky, different kind of colours in the foreground or shades in the foreground. If we go to straightforward hue saturation and desaturate, it's okay, but it's very flat, and we've not got anything much happening in the sky there. Another option is to go to gradient map, and in the gradient map it swaps between the foreground and background colours that you've got here, in which case I've got black and white, so I go to gradient map, and that makes it a little bit more interesting. But there's a strong line here, and I don't really know what's going on. I kind of feel like I want to have a little bit more control over what's going on. So I'm going to go to the background gradient map here, and I'm going to go to black and white. And the black and white here gives me options to play around with the different hues. So the red, because there's a lot of red in the, if I can lighten and darken there like that, that's not really going to help. It's the sky that I'm wanting, so it's the blues. So I can lighten up the blues, but if I bring those blues right down like that, we end up with a nice dramatic sky. That's good, that works. So happy to just sort of drag that now. Could use the cyans again a little bit if I want to kind of pull that down a little bit more. Maybe something like that. So we've got a basic dramatic sky, and quite happy with that, I think. But now we've got this, what else are we going to do? This white patch of road seems very light and is kind of grabbing the attention somewhat. So maybe we can sort of darken that down a little bit. But there's another thing, before we get to that, there's the notion of the crop. Now this is an interesting one, because traditionally what you might do with this is, you are generally speaking, with horizons, you don't tend to go for a horizon that's dead in the middle. What you would normally do is you would go rule of thirds, in which case you would either go put it in the upper third like that. But the problem with that is we lose what was quite interesting texture in the sky. So the other option is we go for a third there. But when we do that, we've got the sky, but then we lose the whole point of the shadow pointing us towards it. So actually this is one of those where I tend to think that what you really want is the horizon in the actual middle. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take that up so it is in the actual middle. Let's go for the actual kind of symmetry, because it's the symmetry which is really what's making this. We're following this line straight into the middle of the photo. Now, the next problem we have with this is the fact that this line, what I was talking about with the diagonals here, we've got this side of the shadow is coming down and more or less hitting the corner. This side isn't. We've got this big gap over here. Now, what you might want to do, I'll tell you what, I'll just create this onto a new level layer here. And at this point, if I Control T, so I can now grab a corner and stretch that out. So I can stretch this bit out until this corner reaches that corner. And that looks kind of better here, except for the fact that what's happened by doing that is, because it stretched it, all the wind turbines are now tilting off to one side. So that's no good. Where are we? Sorry, history. I've edited, gone undo one too far. Right, okay, so what I would suggest here to do is, what you could do is, because we've got, actually I've got to be careful here. I'm just want to get, let's just grab the bottom half of the picture. So I'm going to do that, and I'm going to come across here and copy this and paste this on top. Right? Now I've got the bottom half of this picture as essentially a separate layer. So now I can Control T and I can grab this corner and I can drag it out like that. So we've now got a real, and in fact actually what I might do, because I don't think this one goes directly into the center, I can even drag that over a little bit just to make sure that lines up dead center of the picture this way as well. So by moving a little bit backwards and forwards, I can do that. And because you've got your straight horizon now, you can crop that without it being obvious that suddenly pixels don't line up. So now I think we've got a much better kind of triangle pointing in. And then what I would also do, I kind of want to darken this down. So maybe if I go to a curves level here, and I just kind of drag this and kind of pull this down a little bit. Now, the whole thing has gone dark, which I don't really want. So I'm just going to, if I change that to black, fill that in, and now turn that to white. And basically, let's put that back up to 100%. What I want to do is paint this bit back in, like that. So we make this shadow darker. Maybe I can even just very lightly take in that road as well, because that's just kind of a bit too dark. Now that I've got that on a separate layer, if I want, I can make it even darker. And I quite like that. We kind of bring that down to there. Now, you maybe kind of want to spend a little bit more time about where, the softness of edges and what have you. And maybe I look away, I look back. Maybe it's fractionally overcooked, in which case I can slide this down or up as much as I like. That's our original. And I just kind of keep going until I think I found a place where I think, actually, I quite like that. Yeah. Now I feel we've got a much stronger, darker path, which leads us directly through to the wind farm. Okay? We've got the dramatic sky, we've got the dramatic line. The triangle now feels much more balanced, because the bottom end of the triangle comes into this corner, and over on the right it comes into this corner. So we are looking straight down. And so it's in terms of perspective, it really feels like you've got a perspective. Now, when I start looking at this photo, at this point, what I really think as well is what's a little bit of a shame is that where it's pointing isn't really, you know, is only to a small one. It would have been nice if it was pointing to this bit over here, or that it was pointing to this big one. Now, depending on how much you want to play around with, depending on how much everything's allowed to be played around with, another option here then is if I go back to this layer here, and what I do is I then, let's just, I need to come in a bit closer and get that crop right. If I just do that, and just as we cropped the bottom half before, I'm now going to copy and paste the top half. Now I've got the top half, what I could do, Control T, is I could change this. If I make this bigger, I can steadily pull this over. Now it's very slightly leaning to the left, so actually I can just pull that over a bit more and then just take that up and line this one up with that, the end of the shadow, like that. So now, having done that, we've maybe lost some of the lovely texture that you had in the sky because we've just made the sky slightly bigger. So again, if I just mask that and then I can paint in some of the original sky. I kind of have to be careful here because the cloud shapes are slightly different. So follow the edge of some bits of cloud to try and get it as natural looking as you can. But now, when we look at this photo, what we have is we've got the darkened line, and this line draws our attention straight through to this wind turbine, which is the biggest of the lot in the picture that you had, and it now feels like it now sits atop the shadow. And overall, I think in terms of, you know, so when we go back to your original photo, in fact, let's just put it up here. We can see that this, the shadow, I think all the ideas are there. The shadow's a great idea. The pointing towards the wind farm is a great idea. It's just, it feels like the shadow moves over slightly to the right, and it sort of feels like it's missing where the interesting action would be. And so, like I say, once we've kind of got this, and then at that point, if we just create a new layer, if you wanted, you could go in and play a little bit more around, whereby we add in, where are we? No, not wanting to do that. Go back to optics. Why are you not letting me do anything? Vignette it very slightly, and then maybe again, just play with the clarity tool a little bit, something like that. And that just kind of adds a little bit of punch to it as well. But yeah, so like I said, when we come to this one, it feels like you're onto the right idea. You know you're onto something. There's something really nice about standing in the shadow of this wind turbine, and that the shadow is pointing towards the other wind turbines. It's just that what we've got is the shadow itself isn't necessarily pointing to an interesting bit, and it feels like it's tilted off to the right somewhere. So by playing around, I think with this, ultimately we end up with the kind of, this is the photo that you want to get. And if you can't actually sit around for the couple of hours to wait for the shadows to move to the right place, well, playing around with it in post-production. I don't know what the rules are for a competition that you're putting in this into, whether you're allowed to do much in the way of post-production. You will need to check what the rules are. If they say absolute minimal mucking around with it, then maybe you wouldn't be allowed to do this. But in essence, if you're trying to create a photo which I think has more impact, then what it's about, you've got the leading lines, but you need to get the leading lines leading towards the most interesting bit of the photo. So I hope that helps. I hope that makes sense to you, Robert. Right, okay. So what else have we got here? Pat says, excellent result. Oh, right. Pat says, by the way, I'm worried that Woody is still Starkers in this temperature. So she's talking about, yeah, okay. So I'll tell you what, Pat. If you want to knit him a nice woolly tunic, I'll make sure he's decked out in it. Rosemary says, Pat, you're so funny. Viji says the photograph is about lights and shadow. Rosemary says, I like the horizon dead centre because the angles in the clouds mimic the angles of the lines on the ground. And Sandy says, yes, they're both pointed to the centre and your eye wants to go there. Another option, Robert, just if you happen to be there, just a quick point, in fact, is, let's just flip back here. Another option is if you find yourself in this position again, is go and stand at the end of the shadow and look back. And that way you will get the sun, you will get the silhouette of the wind farm. And you might get the sun kind of creating an interesting kind of light rays coming out. So as long as you always be really careful about pointing your camera directly into the sun. You need to make sure you're standing in the shadow and the sun is not going directly into the lens. But the shadow should be protecting your eyes and your camera, and then allowing the sun to kind of creep around the edges, and maybe even getting light streams coming out of the back of the silhouetted version of the wind turbine. So I would be tempted to do that, is to walk the length of the shadow and turn around and look back and see if there's an interesting photo there as well. Anyway, sorry, that just occurred to me. I thought was so that's so thank you, Robert, for sending that one in, and thank you, Rosemary, and thank you, Viji, for sending in the images to critique. So next week is Festive Fun. Send in your images of Festive Fun, whether that festivity happens to be Christmas or the solstice or Hanukkah or any other kind of festival. It's that kind of time of the year. Now, Festive Fun can be anything you like. There could be Christmas baubles, there could be the candles, it could be you could stick a Christmas hat on your dog, you could wrap a bit of tinsel around the fish tank. There's lots of options. Food, don't forget there's always food at this time, whether you're photographing mince pies or roast turkeys or something like that. It's the notion of still life. There's always the Christmas decorations. What can you do with Christmas decorations? There's people, certainly this is now the time of year where everybody in this part of the world starts to walk around with their Christmas sweaters on, with pictures of Rudolph or the Grinch or Santa or sort of snowflakes or something. There's interactions. There's, if you want to go out and do there's the streets outside where you've got all the Christmas trees, you've got the shop windows, you've got the people walking around carrying their shopping bags. There are loads and loads and loads of opportunities to take photos of this time of year. If you can't get out, I'm sure you took loads of photos last year. Go and raid your archives. So what I would like you to do is, for next week, send me in your fun festive photos. So get them to me ideally by Friday. If you're on Facebook, go to the Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres Facebook group. If you're not on Facebook, then email me, kim@kimayres.co.uk. Tell me a little bit about your photo, what it is, where it was taken, any interesting little anecdotes behind why it was taken. And next week, we'll just have a little bit of fun before Christmas, on the last show of the year, where we can go through our festive photos and then wish each other all a happy Christmas or happy New Year or happy solstice or happy Hanukkah or whatever you want to wish. And then, like I say, we'll be off for 2 weeks because Christmas Day, New Year's Day, I won't be holding the podcast, and then we come back on the 8th of January, when we're going to have the best of 2022. So at that point, what I want you to do is rummage through your files and go, what was my best photo or what was my favourite photo? And again, send it in to me. But that's for, so between Christmas and New Year, send me your favourite photo of 2022 and we'll have some fun with that. And then after that, I'm going to have a real think over Christmas about this. All right, maybe I'll even start a conversation in the Facebook group if you've got any thoughts about this. But I'm really, at the moment, considering the idea of going much more down the idea of these podcasts becoming focused on the critique side of things, because I think that's really where I come to life the most, but also I think it's really where you benefit, and also where you could, because you can't get decent feedback and critique elsewhere on the internet very easily, and certainly not without paying a fortune for it. So yes, that's us. A couple of last final comments here. Robert Stern up says, thanks for the advice. We're late again. Well, you can go back and watch it afterwards. And Viji says, we'll say good night and have a wonderful festive shopping and time for dinner. Take care. So that's brilliant. So thank you, everybody, for all of you for turning up and writing in the comments. And thank you to Viji, Rosemary and Robert for sending in the images. And look forward to seeing what you can send in for the Festive Fun for next week. Take care. Bye-bye.